To follow up on my colleague, apparently Californians think alike today. In the 20 years that I've sat on the dais and looked at report after report of the FBI failure to comply with FISA and its long history of spying on Americans using this legislation as a backdoor, we've seen a pattern, which is we're promised there are going to be changes, and those changes have not occurred. As the gentlelady who just spoke, Ms. Lofgren, would tell you, you're coming up for reauthorization. If the reauthorization were today, based on, and correct me if I'm wrong, the 2019 report by the Inspector General that found 17 significant errors or omissions and 51 wrong or unsupported factual assertions in Carter Page's domestic spying, if you will, using the FISA statute alone. In addition to that, we have numerous people, including judges, who say if they'd known the truth rather than the false statements, they never would have granted those warrants. So now the question is, should we, first of all, do you agree with those findings that at least some of those 68 errors or omissions are accurate, including one of your own that was prosecuted for it?
Well, Congressman, first, let me be clear, just in case there's any confusion to anybody watching. Of course, all of these applications were filed before I became FBI director.
No,
clear.
And to be honest, Director, the reason we're having this conversation, Ms. Lofgren and I both, is that it's your watch. And organizations, no matter how great they are much like airplane pilots. They're not judged on their safe landings, they're judged on their crashes. And this was clearly a crash, wouldn't you say?
Well, what I would say is that the Inspector General's report describes conduct that I consider unacceptable, unrepresentative of who the FBI is, and cannot happen again, which is why I implemented over 40 corrective measures promptly after the Inspector General's report came out, accepted every single finding in the Inspector General's report, implemented every single recommendation in the Inspector General's report, went above and beyond, installed an entirely new leadership team at the FBI, created this new Office of Internal Auditing that I just mentioned to Congresswoman Lofgren. I can go on and on and on, but
let me not let you go on and on just because of short time and ask you, what assurances can you give us today that a current audit would not find current failures?
Well, as somebody who's worked deeply with auditing firms for all sorts of organizations, the point of an audit is to find problems. And so I can't sit here and tell you that no audit would find a problem. That's why we have an auditing program, is to find the problems and fix them. And that's what we're going to do.
Okay. Some time ago, under your predecessor, he came before this Congress and defended a warrant, an unusual one that ordered the company Apple to develop software to allow for a backdoor, purportedly to be on one iPhone used in San Bernardino by a murderer, a terrorist, but in fact they were asking for software that allowed it to be external. Your predecessor claimed that you did not have the technical capability to decipher it. Shortly after that, a college professor showed that for about $300 you could have done it, and yet you paid $1 million to an Israeli firm who did it. Today, can you assure us that you have the tools that you apparently did not have, or would we have to assume that you'd have to ask a professor for a $300 solution or the Israelis for $1 million solution?
Well, as you could imagine, the technology continues to improve both for the bad guys and for the good guys. And so it's not a static situation. But even
knowing that there have been 2 recent failures in cyber attacks, what assurances can you give this committee that you have the resources and a plan to be on the leading edge of cyber rather than the trailing edge of cyber, which appears to be where we are in a number of areas?
We constantly need more resources to get further and further ahead of the bad guys in this particular space. The technology in terms of encryption, which is sort of the point you're getting at with the Apple example, has continued to advance in a way that's actually making it harder and harder for law enforcement, not just the FBI, but all across this country, to get into encrypted devices and certainly encrypted messaging platforms. We saw that, for example, down in Congressman Gates's district in Pensacola with the Naval Air Station attack there. And we tried to get into Apple's iPhone, the device that the terrorists there used. And by the way, he took the time in the middle of the attack to shoot the phone. Think about the presence of mind that he has to have in the middle of that to do that, to try to prevent us from getting into his phone. Our folks were able, in that instance, to reconstruct the phone. And because of a fluke in that particular instance, we were able to actually get into the device. But it took months and months and months and hours and hours and hours and hours and lots of taxpayer money to get there. And only then, after not having gotten the cooperation that we really could have used from Apple at the front end, we found out that that particular terrorist had been in communication with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula right on up till the night before the attack, not known at the time that the attack was disrupted. So it's an illustration of what a challenge this is for law enforcement, and it affects terrorist investigations. It affects an issue that I know is near and dear to every member of this committee, child sexual exploitation investigations. And it's something that I hear about. I've been to talk to law enforcement in all 50 states, and I hear about it from chiefs and sheriffs in every state about this issue. So it is top of mind. We are bringing technical tools, using the money that Congress appropriates to us to deal with it. We're moving in a direction where we're going darker and darker, so I appreciate very much your concern.
The gentleman's time is well expired.